Overheads are indirect costs. All right. Examples of overheads: depreciation, rent, supervisor salaries. These are indirect costs because they cannot easily be traced into the finished product. Okay. So today, first, we're going to look at what is overhead absorption. Okay. We're basically just including the overhead costs into the to account for them when you are tabulating the cost of the units that you're producing. Okay, overhead absorption is just about including the overheads in the cost per unit for the whatever you are producing. Because remember, whenever you're producing things, you've got your direct materials cost, which can easily get. You've got your direct labor cost, okay, and you've got other direct expenses. But overheads, it's hard just to get the overhead cost per unit. All right. So after you have done your overhead apportionment and then you get your overhead absorption rate, which is basically just your overhead cost per unit, then you'll be able to include the overheads in the cost per unit. Okay. So there are many ways we can absorb overheads. Okay. The formula that you just must remember is to get your overhead absorption rate. Okay. It's just your total overheads divided by your absorption base. Total. Mhm. We are going to that. We are going to that. A portion. Yes. I just, no, no, no. It's like today when we're starting counting. Okay. It's like we've started this topic here, accounting for overheads. So we'll be getting to that overhead apportionment and allocation. Yes. So usually the standard formula for absorbing overheads is your total overheads by your absorption base. You can have many absorption bases. You can have number of units. You can have direct labor hours. You can also use machine hours. Okay. Because this overhead absorption rate is just your overhead cost per unit. Okay, colleagues? The overhead absorption rate is just your overhead cost per unit. Right? Then the other way you can get also your absorption rate if you're basing it on material cost. Okay. Just your total overheads, the absorption base, the direct material cost, but you're converting it into a percentage. Okay. That's why we're multiplying by 100. Mm-hmm. Is that a question? Okay, yes. If you want to use the basis of wages, also this one you use a percentage. So for direct materials and wages, you usually get them as percentage formats, okay, by multiplying by 100. But for other bases like number of units, direct labor, machine hours, You don't need to convert them into percentage. You just divide and you've got your overhead absorption rate. So I'm going to show you an example of this. Okay, and we've got an example here. You've got your total overhead cost here, 72,000 kwacha, or 72 million, since there are two zeros. There are three zeros here, so 72 million kwacha. We have to calculate the absorption rates using the various bases. Okay, remember, just this absorption rate is just your overhead cost per unit, colleagues, okay? And it's put in the cost, it's also included in the cost per unit so that you can charge the right amount. Okay, so they've told us to calculate the overhead absorption rates using the various bases. So we've got direct materials, direct labor hours, machine hours, or direct labor cost. And also got direct labor hours and units of production. So we're going to use these various absorption bases to calculate our overhead absorption rate. Now in the exam, it's up to you to choose. Okay, they rarely tell you which one to use, so it's up to you to choose. All right, so we can start with materials cost. Okay, we want to get our overhead absorption rate using the direct materials cost. All right, so all right, so our first absorption base, we're going to use direct materials. Okay, so with direct materials, we're going to use this formula here for direct materials. The total overheads divided by the direct material cost, then we multiply that by 100. So our total overheads here, total overheads, yes, so you get your overheads over your direct material cost times 100. So the total overheads are 72 million. Direct materials, 64 million. Okay, so colleagues, 72 million divided by 64 million, what do we get? 72 million divided by 64 million, what do we get? Colleagues, no one has come with a calculator. This is cost accounting, colleagues. This course, it's not theory. It's not a theoretical course. There are a lot of calculations involved. So you have to get used to tabulating, punching that calculator. Madam Karen, 74 million is 74 divided by 72 million divided by 64 million. What do we get? 1.125 times 100%. 112.5%. Okay, so this is the absorption rate that we're going to use. I'm going to illustrate because this example doesn't end here. So I'm going to illustrate how we're going to use these absorption rates after we calculate them. Okay, but this is our rate based on direct materials cost. Any questions before I move to the next rate using direct labor cost? Okay, we get our next overhead absorption rate on direct labor cost. Okay, also this one in the question, you look what information will be given. So usually in the question, a lot of times you usually see machine hours, you see direct labor hours, you see units of production. You can also see these direct materials cost, direct labor cost. Okay, so if you see any of them, okay, you see any of them, you can use. All right, you can use any of them. Okay, so we use now get our absorption rate with the direct labor cost. Total overhead 72 million divided by the direct labor cost 80 million. Okay, the whole concept here is you're just saying out of your direct labor cost, what percentage is the overheads representing? Okay, out of your direct materials cost, what percentage is the overheads representing? Okay, and that would be your absorption rate. Okay, so 72 million divided by 80 million, what do we get? 0.9, 90%. So basically, out of your direct labor cost, overheads represents 90%. Out of your direct material costs, overheads represent 112.5%. So as I said, I'm going to show you how we use them. After we calculate them, I'll show you how we're going to use each of them. Okay, so now we're going to use machine hours. Okay, machine hours. Now, colleagues, this is the traditional way of doing things. Okay, this is how it was done in the old days. Nowadays, companies are using activity-based costing, not this traditional method. Because this traditional method, companies nowadays have got various overheads that they are facing. So some absorption bases will not account for all the overheads that company is going through. So that's why they use now activity-based costing. So total overheads 72 million, machine hours 10,000. So say 72 million divided by 10,000. What do we get? 7.2. Oh wait, this 10,000, is it in millions first? No, it's not in millions. Yeah. So we remove, no, it's 7,200. 72 million divided by 10,000. 7,200. Ah, no, no, no. These ones you won't multiply by 100. It's only these costs. Okay. If you're using direct material cost and labor cost, that's one way you get, okay, your overheads, what percentage are they representing of these costs? Okay. It's only for direct materials cost and labor cost. For machine hours, labor hours, and units of production, you're not multiplying by 100. Okay. Yes. So here it's 7,200 kwacha per machine hour. Okay. 7,200 kwacha per machine hour. If we use direct labor hours are 72,000. Yes, the direct labor hours, 8. We're going to say total overhead 72 million kwacha divided by the direct labor hours 18,000 hours. Okay. These denominators here, like for the one previously, this was 10,000 machine hours. It wasn't a cost. Okay. Then here, this is 18,000 direct labor hours. So 72 million divided by 18,000. Mhm. Just 4,000. Okay, 4,000 kwacha per direct labor hour. Okay. The units of production. Again, it's just your total overhead divided by number of units of production. Okay, remember earlier on when I said this formula here, total overheads over absorption base? Yes, just the total overheads divided by the absorption base. So 72 million kwacha divided by the number of units produced, 12,000. Yes, 72 million divided by 12,000, 6,000 kwacha per unit. Okay. So, colleagues, these things that we've calculated here, this is just our overhead absorption rate. Okay. Think of the overhead absorption rate as the overhead cost per unit. Okay. So now I'm going to illustrate to you how we use these absorption rates that we've calculated. Any questions before I go there? Sure, he said that. Oh, direct labor yes can be tracked to the product. Overheads are costs that cannot be connected to the finished product. No, what you're saying, no, let me help you out, madam. Yes, what you're basically saying here is that direct labor is not an overhead, and that is true. Direct labor is not an overhead. Overheads are thing. These are costs that cannot be easily traced to the finished product. Now, here in this case, we're just using the direct labor hours as our absorption base. We're not considering it as an overhead, no, but we're just using it as an absorption base. Yes, madam. Okay, so this is the next part of the question. All right. It is saying using each of the overhead absorption rates calculated above, estimate production overheads that will be absorbed in product XYZ, which has the following details. Okay. So you have your direct materials cost, 80,000, direct labor cost, 85,000. Oh, we needed also to calculate using prime cost. Colleagues, what are prime costs? What to calculate with prime costs? What are prime costs? This is direct labor and direct uh, materials. Okay, those are what you call your prime costs. All right. So whenever you hear the word prime cost, yes, yes. I'm recording. I'm recording. We're at a critical stage. Oh, your network. We have seen people getting kicked in and out. Okay. Don't worry, I'm recording these colleagues, okay? For those who are having network challenges, okay, I'm recording this for you. Yes. So as I was saying, prime costs, these are your direct costs, okay? Direct labor, direct materials, and any other direct expenses. Then what about conversion costs, colleagues? It includes one prime. It uses one prime cost. Conversion cost, direct labor, and the manufacturing overheads. So please write that down. Prime costs, the direct costs, direct labor, direct material. Conversion costs, your overheads and your direct labor. Okay. So using prime cost as our absorption base, you just add direct materials plus direct labor. So that is 64 million plus 80 million. What do we get? 64 million plus 80 million. 144 million. Okay. Okay. Times 100%. Divide first 72 million by 144 million divided by 144. 0.5. So overheads are representing 50% of all the prime costs, which gives us 50%. Yes. So we can refer back to now this question here. Okay. Using each of the absorption rates, we need to calculate the production overheads that will be absorbed with. So we've been given direct material cost, direct labor cost, prime cost, machine hours 15 hours, labor hours 25 hours. Even units again, say number of units produced 1000. Okay, also add units. So this is how we calculate now, colleagues. And so since we start with direct materials cost, our absorption rate was 112.5%. We're just getting our absorbed overheads. So direct materials cost times direct material overhead absorption rate. So you're just going to say 80,000 times 112.5%. What do we get? Let's see, are they in millions here? Okay, these are in thousands. No, 120 multiplied by 112.5%. It's 1.125. When you divide this by 100, it's 1.125. So 80. Mhm. 90,000. Okay. So here, colleagues, the absorption rate, you're only multiplying to where it's applying to. Okay, you can't use the absorption rate for units of production here on direct material cost. Neither can you use the absorption rate for direct materials cost on machine hours or labor hours. So each overhead absorption rate is going to apply to whatever is stated. Okay. So for direct labor cost times the direct labor OAR, our direct labor cost is 85,000. Our overhead absorption rate for direct labor cost was 90%. So 85,000 times 90%, 26,500. Okay. Colleagues, these are just the overheads that we're calculating here, okay? All these amounts that we get, these are representing the overheads. The prime cost is 165,000 multiplied by overhead absorption rate for prime cost was 50%. So 50%, 82,500. Kwacha. All of this is in kwacha. With machine hours, just your machine hours multiplied by the overhead absorption rate for machine hours. So they told us machine hours, they used 15 machine hours, 15 hours, multiplied by our overhead absorption rate for machine hours was 7,200 per machine hour. So you're going to say 15 hours multiplied by 7,200 per machine hour. So 15 times 7,200. 108,000. All right. And if we use labor hours, okay, so it's your labor hours multiplied by your overhead absorption rate based on labor hours. So our labor hours in this case is 25 labor hours multiplied by our overhead absorption rate for labor hours. Where is that? Labor hours. Yes, it's 4,000 kwacha per direct labor hour. So 4,000 kwacha per direct labor hour. So 25 times 4,000, 100,000. Okay. Let me just add another one. Let's say, for example, if they put units produced, let's say we say maybe 2,000 units. Now, this is the one which you'll be seeing the most in a lot of questions. Okay, in a lot of questions, you will see they'll tell you they'll tell you to calculate. They'll give you a number of units and they'll give you the overhead. Okay. So here, our overhead absorption rate is 6,000 kwacha per unit. So if we produced 2,000 units, 6 times 2,000, 6 times what? Not 2,000, 2,000. Yeah, 6 times 2,000. Since units produces 2,000 units, overhead absorption rate is 6,000. So what do we get? 2,000 times 6,000. 12 million, I think. This should be 12 million. 6,000 times 2,000. Okay. So these are our overheads which we've calculated. So basically what we've seen here is once you get your overhead absorption rate, for example, like what you saw, what the overhead absorption rate for machine hours. So when you want to now calculate your overhead, you just go and say, okay, how many machine hours did I use? 50 machine hours. Multiply it by my overhead absorption rate. That's the overhead that's been incurred. If you used direct materials cost, you say, okay, what's my direct materials cost? You get it. What's my overhead absorption rate based on the direct material cost? You get it. You multiply the two. It's going to give you your overheads. Any questions before we move to the fun part? Because this is just the surface.